I would like to introduce Sarah Milroy, but that's almost absurd because Sarah Milroy is one of the figures of Toronto's art scene that almost requires no introduction whatsoever. Sarah is one of the founders and guardian angels of Canadian Art Magazine. She is a former publisher, former editor, but she has other aspects of her life beyond simply Canadian Art Magazine. She has been the staff art critic of the Globe and Mail, where she continues to be a columnist, having been the art editor. She contributes to Border Crossings. She contributes to the Walrus. She's a regular contributor to Art Magazine and Canadian Art Magazine, and indeed is responsible for the issue, for the article on Peter Doig in our current issue. So, enough of me. Now, Sarah Milroy.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you all for coming out in the wind and the rain. And I guess it helps us to be more in sympathy with Inuit art, because if anyone knows anything about adverse weather conditions, it's the Inuit people. Itee Pootoogok, whose work is here, comes from a great family. His grandfather, the original Pootoogok, was one of the first leaders in the original camp when settlement was first undertaken, coming in off the land. And his grandfather, Paulusi, or his father, rather, Paulusi Pootoogok, was a great sculptor, printmaker, and draftsman. His cousin, Annie Pootoogok, created works about contemporary Inuit culture that broke the mold on Inuit contemporary art. She pictured the social distress and dysfunction in Aboriginal communities in the north, and was a very brave and generous soul in how she shared her experience with the Canadian public. She went on to represent Canada at Documenta in Germany and so on, a real pioneer. And his uncle was Kinngait Pootoogok, who died a few years ago, but who was one of the most extraordinary artists to capture, in particular to capture animals and reindeers, all sorts of marvelous, marvelously closely observed works documenting the natural world in the north, and also a great spirit. So Itee comes from all of this and works in a different way than any of the people in his family. He shows us so much about what it's like to be up in the north. I've been lucky enough to travel up there with Pat a couple of times over the past few years and spend time in Cape Dorset, where Itee lives. And I find it very nostalgic to look at this show because it reminds me so much about what it's like to be in Cape Dorset. There is the extreme sense when you look at these works, I think, of a kind of quiet, silent, measured pace of life, and there's incredible sensitivity to the qualities of light. I think in Itee's work, I mean, you can see this wonderful, right behind Margaret, there's this wonderful, heavy, brooding, lead sky that's like a dark black flannel in the sky. And really, when you go there in the wintertime, there's just, of course, a little bit of twilight in the middle of the afternoon, and then it descends back into darkness again. So the impact of that in terms of your experience of space and mood and so on is just so profound, and I really feel like he captures that beautifully in a number of these works. And then it goes all the way to the extreme of that blistering blue day from the hill up above Cape Dorset that's obviously in full sunshine, and where you just feel like the whole top of the lid's been taken off the top of the world and you're just staring straight into this kind of radiant universe. It's it really, I've been on a snowmobile actually up there with Notuak's daughter, who is a wild and crazy snowmobile ranger and driver and also I guess they would call him a forest ranger because there's no forest, but that kind of role. And when I look at that picture, I remember like whipping around with her on her snowmobile up there in the blazing sun, and it was a pretty unforgettable day. So it brings you back to remembering how in life today there is this mixture of traditional hunting, but done with contemporary tools. So you'll often see things, the important things are still being observed, but they're being done in different ways. And if you look closely at a lot of these works, I mean, this is actually Jimmy Manning, who's a real kind of unofficial or maybe even official mayor of Cape Dorset. and ran the co-op there for many years and so on, fixing his outboard motor. And so, you know, the reliance upon one's equipment and tools to work and to make survival possible, to make hunting possible, is still the same, just the tools have changed. And you often find yourself when you're up there kind of stumbling over these strange collisions of kind of primordial hunting practices with, you know, very much in the 21st century modalities. So his work shows us that. But one of the things that I think is maybe was a little bit of a surprise to me was how important photography has become in Inuit culture. I noticed, like going to visit with Pat, we'd go around to various houses, and one of the real activities was the sharing of photographs among people as a way of visiting. Like, we did this, we did that, and it would be almost like the showing of the pictures was starting to take the place even of describing things or talking. It was a way of socializing through the photographic digital image. And a lot of artists use photography more and more as a way of kind of, you know, I came to think of it as sort of hunting for images. You know, it requires that sharp eye, that editorial ability to discern, you know, what's the important thing here. And many of the photographs here are actually taken by Tim Pitsulak, who's another amazingly talented Inuit artist who's going to be showing some spectacular new work at the art fair, I have to say. Just wanted to put that in there. But I wrote about Tim for Walrus, and Tim's practice is to share his photography with everyone in the community. So in the traditional way that if someone killed a beluga whale, they would bring it into the community, it would be cut up and butchered, and it would be shared with everyone there. Here comes Sherry Boyle, who spent some time in Cape Dorset. Yes, sorry. In the same way that, you know, food would have been chopped up and shared around everyone who needed it, the photographic data bank in the Cape Dorset printmaking studio, which is kept by Bill Ritchie, who runs the shop there, is shared by everyone. So a lot of these pictures were actually taken by Tim and are used by Itee. And it's fascinating to me, you know, the whole idea of authorial, like having a discrete, like one person's authorial vision. It's just not the way to think about anything in the Inuit world. Being the isolated individual with one vision, like the idea of sharing your images, sharing your food, and sharing your good fortune as well is all very much a part of that way of life. And even the whole, you know, economic structure of how Inuit art is distributed is very much communal, and at the really insistence of that community. So it's, and the benefits are accrued communally. So, but what you see in Itee's work a lot of the time is these effects, which we got in photography, for example, at the turn of the century, people like Degas, when the camera was a new thing. Very dramatic cropping of the image and a kind of dramatic sense of coming up with surprising perspectives. So, for example, there's a beautiful drawing down here of clam digging, which is, you know, a very unusual perspective. You're looking down into the mud, basically. It's quite unconventional. It's the kind of effect that you would really only have through experiencing things through the camera or cropping things through a dramatic effect. And, you know, I think that there is a lot of anxiety around the notion of what is an authentic Inuit way of seeing. Because, of course, the South went up to the Arctic and changed their culture. And there was, until very recently, a kind of school of thought that works that showed the kind of hybridity and exchange between cultures and different ways of seeing and so on, meant somehow that the art was less authentic. Of course, now what we realize more and more is that culture is hybrid, has always been hybrid. You know, we need to explore that and celebrate the meanings that come out of cultures rubbing up against each other. And this is one of the things that's taking place in terms of scholarship around the Pacific Northwest Coast culture, where we're now finding that there are Chinese coins being used as eyes in masks that were made in the 1700s. And we start to think, okay, what is this, you know, obsession that we've had anthropologically with discretion between cultures? So I see Itee's work as wonderfully demonstrative of kind of a kind of hybrid authenticity about Inuit life today and all the different things that play into it, from traditional ways of life and food gathering and so on, to all the new technologies that the community there is so excited about and interested in using in new ways. And it's sort of through that lens that I see this show.